And you do too, don't you?
Of course.
Now, my position on it, and I've had it for a few days, is this guy is in his 80s. And I'm just now 50. I can imagine that somebody in their 80s might well not want the world descending on them, which is exactly what would occur if his name gets out, and it's going to get out. I'm just not going to be part of it. And so how do you feel about that?
Well, I feel the same way, but the reason I'm not revealing his name is a very simple one. I promised not to. It was given to me in confidence, and
right.
For me to keep my position as an independent consultant, I have to keep confidences when they're given to me. If I violate one confidence, that's the end of my trust within the camera industry.
I think that it's this man's own struggle. I'm sure he's struggling now with his conscience about whether or not he should come forward. But if he doesn't want to, I'm not going to out him, and I'm going to be a little upset with whoever does, even given the importance of this story. I don't think we have any right to do that. I don't feel like that anyway. Okay. I would like you to take a few phone calls in the balance of this hour, if you wouldn't mind.
No problem.
Let's try it. Let's see what people have to say out there. East of the Rockies, you're on the air with Bob Shell. Hello.
Hello there.
Where are you calling from, sir?
I'm calling from Memphis.
Memphis, all right.
Yes, there is quite a delay. It's kind of weird.
Just turn your radio off.
Oh, it's been on.
All right.
Okay, got a few questions about the film that we saw on Fox and saw tonight. And one is about the danger sign. I've read on the internet about how there's something written under the danger sign, and that might give a clue to what's it about.
There's something written under the danger sign, but I haven't been able to read it and haven't had the time yet to try digital enhancement to see what it says. I'm sure we will be able to read it once we do some tweaking around with it on the computer.
And another question is about the clock, and since this is, I guess, supposedly at a military site, why isn't the clock in a 24-hour clock where it goes 24 hours all the way around?
All right. That's an interesting question. I wouldn't have the answer.
No, I have no answer to that either, except that I have other photos from the same time period taken on military installations that show similar clocks. So that doesn't bother me because obviously those clocks were used by the military.
Mm-hmm.
They may not have been the only ones used. There may have been 24-hour clocks used also.
I'm beginning to get the distinct feeling that you feel as I do about this, Bob, and I can't be sure, but I lean toward thinking this film is authentic. How about you?
Well, I'm not going to say that I'm giving it the thumbs up yet. My gut feeling is that it's the real thing, but I have not established that to my own satisfaction yet.
All right, I would say that's about my position. Whoops. First-time caller line, you're on the air with Bob Shell. Hi.
Hello, how you doing tonight? Las Vegas calling in.
Yes, sir.
KVG.
KVG, you bet.
I have a question.
Turn your radio off, sir.
Oh, okay. Last Monday night, a caller misspoke and said that this alien had no nipples.
It is untrue. There are nipples. They're very, very difficult to see, but they are there.
It seemed like they were there, but very light color.
Yeah. Well, that is still not a resolved question.
Oh, really?
Whether there are or are not nipples. What some people are interpreting as a nipple on the left side of the body, there's obviously no visible nipple on the right side of the body. On the left side of the body, it's been interpreted as a nipple, but I've looked at it, I've analyzed it on the computer, I've blown it up to giant size. I'm not sure what it is. It's an area where there's some difference in the skin, yes. But whether it's a nipple or whether it's a damaged area of skin or whether it's something else entirely, we just don't know yet.
Okay, thank you, sir.
All right, thank you very much for the call from Las Vegas. West of the Rockies, you're on the air with Bob Shell in Washington, D.C. Hello.
This is Ashland, Oregon calling. The thing that really strikes me the most is something that somebody said, is that if this were a hoax, it would be an extremely expensive hoax. And the thing that strikes me is that what kind of person would shell out that kind of money to give this kind of hoax and not step forward and say, yes, it was me and I did it, it's a hoax, I'm a genius.
Gee, I can even do better than that. What kind of person would shell out that kind of money in 1947 to 9 when the film was apparently exposed and then hold on to it for all these years thinking, gee, someday there's going to be a big alien controversy and I can make a lot of money?
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense.
I think the only people that could have done that back then would have been the government. I had a very heated debate with a friend the other day about this, and he brought up the point that, you know, there might be a reason for somebody trying to make the general populace believe that there's an extraterrestrial culture. And he said that the government might, have a reason for wanting the American people to believe that there is an alien presence, either to scare them and to get some sort of control over them, or perhaps they already have contact and they're starting to release these things to test the waters to see, how the American people would react to such an alien race if there was. Just random thoughts out there.
Well, there is one suggestion that sort of makes sense about why the government would have faked a film like this.
All right.
The suggestion was given to me by a former intelligence person who said that maybe this film was faked in 47 to intentionally leak it to the Russians, to scare the heck out of them, to make them think we had access to this alien technology.
That's an interesting scenario. And one cannot underestimate the government coming up with just about anything.
Oh, yeah.
You told me at the beginning of the show you were once CIA for a short time, and that is not relevant to this at all. But maybe you can comment on that aspect of it. In other words, having been on the inside, is that something that you would consider likely or not?
I don't consider it likely. I consider it possible.
Possible.
I'd say it's fairly remote because I think there would be easier ways to scare the Russians and more productive ways. So I don't really know how likely that scenario is. I think it fits pretty low on the likelihood scale at this point.
Well, I would have to agree because we were at, obviously, the beginning of the nuclear age, and if you wanted to scare the Russians, we had some pretty real things to scare them with. Mm-hmm. Seems to me we wouldn't need alien autopsies. On the first-time caller line, welcome to the program. You're on the air with Bob.
Hello?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, where are you, ma'am?
I'm in Houston.
Houston, Texas. All right.
Right. CNN did do a little thing on the Roswell thing yesterday.
I saw it, but there was absolutely no reference to the film.
Well, they showed some clips from the film.
Oh, it did?
Yes, sir. They sure did. It showed they were a little bit larger looking, and it showed the body with the eyes and all of that. And the main thrust of the whole broadcast was the fact that Roswell has become more or less a money-making deal.
Yes, well, I certainly saw that, but I did not see that.
There were about 3 very brief scenes of the film itself.
Were they stills or moving pictures?
No, they seemed to be stills. I was not sitting down looking. I was just in the room, and I glanced up when I saw it. But it looked like they were just flashed 2 or 3 still pictures up there. It could have been moving pictures.
Well, maybe the door then is beginning to crack open. Bob, do you think that this film, ultimately, when all of it is out, will be strong enough to crack the door open and begin to make the American people, the people of the world, realize there may be something to all this?
Honestly, I doubt it. Because the confirmed skeptic is not going to be convinced if one of these creatures walks up and offers a 6-fingered handshake.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I frequently said, Bob, that if somebody suddenly came forward with a film of some guy on the grassy knoll with a rifle and showing the trigger being squeezed and then a slow-mo of the bullet leaving the gun and hitting President Kennedy from the grassy knoll, people wouldn't believe it. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are some things that have received, there's so much information out there that if somebody stood on a podium, short of the president, and said it is real. It's just one more piece of information.
Right. My big hope about this film is that it will bring out a lot more eyewitnesses before they all die off, because there's still a lot of people out there who have not come forward.
What would you think the government's... well, for example, so far, utter silence from our government. Now, there's a lot of ways of looking at this. Ray Santilli bought the film, but if this is really an authentic film, that means it's actually U.S. government property. And I don't see how you can copyright U.S. government property.
You can't, but the problem is for the government to come out and tell him you can't copyright it, they have to admit it's legit.
It's theirs, yes.
The catch-22.
Yes, indeed. If this is a legitimate film, having been on the inside once, Bob, what do you think the government's present position on it is? I mean, do you think they'll just keep their mouths shut, not say a word, let people chuckle and chortle, and let everybody wonder, or will they eventually crack open? I would have once said this kind of a secret never could have been kept. But, I mean, recently we've got Hazel O'Leary coming forward saying we fed, plutonium or whatever to kids, and that was kept secret all those years. Very well. We never knew about it. Would have been the scandal of the century. But Hazel O'Leary walked out on to a podium and said, yes, we did this. It was horrible, but we did it. They kept that secret.
Well, they've kept quite a few things secret. Their current approach seems to be just to sort of let this thing work itself out in the public arena and see what happens. I think they're taking a wait-and-see attitude. Before I got involved in this, I went to a very good friend of mine who's an ex-CIA person, because I wanted to know if he thought I'd be incurring any real personal danger by getting involved in this.
Right.
And his comment was, no, they've decided to let it out, because if they hadn't wanted to let it out, Ray Santilli and the cameraman would both have disappeared and be dead weeks ago.
Then this calls for a conjecture, of course, but why would you think they would make the decision to let it out?
I'm not sure they made the decision to let it out, but I think that the fact that it has come out, they may have decided just to let this play itself out and see what happens, rather than to try to intervene and confiscate the film, which is far too late to try to do that.
Oh, much too late.
Or to come out with another cover story, and their cover stories have so far not gotten them very far. Nobody's believed them anyway.
Well, to me, it's a little like the Furman tapes. They first said it's a saucer, Major Jesse Marcel, and you do too, don't you?
Oh, of course.
Now, my position on it, and I've had it for a few days, is this guy is in his 80s, and I'm just now 50. I can imagine that somebody in their 80s might well not want the world descending on them, which is exactly what would occur if his name gets out, and it's going to get out. I'm just not going to be part of it. And so how do you feel about that?
Well, I feel the same way, but the reason I'm not revealing his name is a very simple one. I promised not to. It was given to me in confidence, and
right.
For me to keep my position as an independent consultant, I have to keep confidences when they're given to me. If I violate one confidence, that's the end of my trust within the camera industry.
I think that it's this man's own struggle. I'm sure he's struggling now with his conscience about whether or not he should come forward. But if he doesn't want to, I'm not going to out him, and I'm going to be a little upset with whoever does, even given the importance of this story. I don't think we have any right to do that. I don't feel like that anyway. Okay, I would like you to take a few phone calls in the balance of this hour, if you wouldn't mind.
No problem.
Let's try it. Let's see what people have to say out there. East of the Rockies, you're on the air with Bob Shell. Hello.
Hello there.
Where are you calling from, sir?
I'm calling from Memphis.
Memphis, all right.
Yes, there is quite a delay. It's kind of weird.
Just turn your radio off.
Oh, it's been on.
All right.
Okay, got a few questions about the film that we saw on Fox and saw tonight. And one is about the danger sign. I've read on the internet about how there's something written under the danger sign, and that might give a clue to what's it about.
There's something written under the danger sign, but I haven't been able to read it and haven't had the time yet to try digital enhancement to see what it says. I'm sure we will be able to read it once we do some tweaking around with it on the computer.
And another question is about the clock, and since this is, I guess, supposedly at a military site, why isn't the clock in a 24-hour clock where it goes 24 hours all the way around?
All right. That's an interesting question. I wouldn't have the answer.
No, I have no answer to that either, except that I have other photos from the same time period taken on military installations that show similar clocks. So that doesn't bother me because obviously those clocks were used by the military.
Mm-hmm.
They may not have been the only ones used. There may have been 24-hour clocks used also.
I'm beginning to get the distinct feeling that you feel as I do about this, Bob, and I can't be sure, but I lean toward thinking this film is authentic. How about you?
Well, I'm not going to say that I'm giving it the thumbs up yet. My gut feeling is that it's the real thing, but I have not established that to my own satisfaction yet.
All right, I would say that's about my position. Whoops. First-time caller line, you're on the air with Bob Shell. Hi.
Hello, how you doing tonight? Las Vegas calling in.
Yes, sir.
KVG.
KVG, you bet.
I have a question.
Turn your radio off, sir.
Oh, okay. Last Monday night, a caller misspoke and said that this alien had no nipples.
It is untrue. There are nipples. They're very, very difficult to see, but they are there.
It seemed like they were there, but very light color.
Yeah. Well, that is still not a resolved question.
Oh, really?
Whether there are or are not nipples. What some people are interpreting as a nipple on the left side of the body, there's obviously no visible nipple on the right side of the body. On the left side of the body, it's been interpreted as a nipple, but I've looked at it, I've analyzed it on the computer, I've blown it up to giant size. I'm not sure what it is. It's an area where there's some difference in the skin, yes. But whether it's a nipple or whether it's a damaged area of skin or whether it's something else entirely, we just don't know yet.
Okay, thank you, sir.
All right, thank you very much. Many decades, if it's kept in cold storage. It would be a matter of locating stored film, which seems difficult, but I bet a thorough search would turn some up. I've read that film left in the Arctic by one of the early expeditions was usable many years later. Then, too, your expert is forgetting that Kodak never marketed a 16-millimeter nitrate film. 35-millimeter nitrate film was common until the late 40s, early 50s, but Kodak never sold nitrate 16-millimeter because the early acetates were good enough for that purpose. Jim in Portland.
Well, now, the second part of that I'll deal with first.
All right.
As far as nitrate, the information that Kodak did make nitrate 16-millimeter film came directly from Kodak, and it has come from several different sources at Kodak. I have no personal knowledge. I wasn't around in the 20s, but I would assume Kodak would know what they did and didn't do.
Good
and
point.
they have on a number of occasions said that the film that they made in 27, 16-millimeter and 35, would have been on nitrate base.
All right.
So I'm relying on Kodak for that piece of information. If Kodak's wrong, then they're wrong. But that's really not terribly relevant to what we're talking about.
All right, now the possibility that a bunch of this was stored in the Arctic or the equivalent somewhere and held for all those years.
Well, actually, somebody else had asked me a while back if it had been stored in an abandoned salt mine in cryogenic conditions. And under those circumstances, maybe it would still be pretty good film today. The person who made this comment is right. Old film can be used, but the faster the speed of the film, the less likely that is to work, because film is all gradually fogged as it sits around by cosmic radiation.
Mm-hmm.
And the higher speed films are much more sensitive to cosmic radiation than the slower films.
That radiation we're all bombarded with all the time.
That's why the question about the salt mine.
Uh-huh. Oh, I see.
That's the only place where you can store something and limit the exposure to cosmic radiation. But even at that, when you're dealing with a very sensitive film, which this was for its time, it was one of the fastest films made at the time, you're dealing with a situation where after just a few years, the film has built up enough cosmic radiation exposure to show measurable fogging, which this film does not show.
All right, and again, your work for this audience has, at least on a preliminary basis, pinned down the year not to 27 or 67, but to 1947 or 1949, somewhere in that range.
We pinned down the year of manufacture of the film.
Okay.
Rather precisely to 47.
To 47. God, that's
now
important.
we cannot prove that the film was exposed and processed in 47, but we can establish within certain parameters that the film was exposed and processed while it was still quite fresh.
Well, if this news, or would have had to have been, you said, within a few years.
Right.
So, you know, that adds so much to the credibility of this whole thing. Then why in God's name hasn't Fox come to you to extend the story and the credibility of what they've got?
Fox and I have had a sort of I would say, rocky relationship on this from the beginning. I was quite surprised when I saw the TV special the first time, because I had been promised repeatedly that I would have a credit in the end credits of the film. And when I saw the program, it wasn't there. Fox has been pushing me to do things faster than I'm comfortable to do them.
I see.
They want 100% guarantee that this film is what it is claimed to be, and they wanted it in time to use on their program.
And you weren't prepared to do that at that point?
I couldn't do it at that point.
Or may not even be able to do it right now?
No, the time frame just wasn't realistic. I mean, if you do things correctly, it takes time. So I couldn't give them what they wanted, which is why I wasn't on the program. I may be on the follow-up program if by the time they get ready to do the follow-up, I'm able to give them what they're after.
This is completely off course for a second, but with the story they told about the crash, if we, for the sake of the argument here, assume this is a valid film and a valid story, I was so saddened at the way humans treated what seemed to be alien creatures, you know, rifle butt in the head, that kind of thing, to get the box away. I guess I'm not surprised by it, but I was saddened by it. Did you have any reaction?
Well, the first time I read the cameraman's transcribed statement, it made me physically sick. Because here are badly injured creatures crying out in pain, and they're being hit with rifle butts, and they're having what to them is obviously something very crucial that they're clutching to themselves tightly, torn away from them by force. And we don't know what these boxes were they were clutching. Maybe these were life support systems of some sort. All we know is that a short time after the one was hit with the rifle butt and its metal box taken from it, that one died.
Sad. That's the word I come up with, is sad. And here we go again. I said in the earlier hour that I had the name of the cameraman. And here's the kind of response I get. Art, if you have the cameraman's name, you are now part of the cover-up. At least to maintain some credibility, you or someone else should verify that this name was in the armed services. My God, you know yourself how important it is. We all know the truth. Well, he was in the armed services. There's no question about that. The question is whether or not we pursue this guy and break his privacy, and it would be broken severely. He's in his 80s. I'm going to say it again. I am not going to out this guy. I'm not going to do it. He's got a right to his privacy, and I'm not going to be the one to break it. And, Bob, you are respecting, you also have his name, and you're respecting that confidence as well, right?
All I can say is welcome to the conspiracy. You're part of it now.
Yeah, thank you.
No, I am respecting his privacy because I've been asked to. And his story and his name and all of the rest of this will be brought out ultimately in time by the people who were involved in this project if we're allowed to do things properly. I plan to interview the cameraman quite extensively, face-to-face, in a matter of about 2 weeks. And at that time, a lot of these questions people have been asking me to ask the cameraman will be asked.
What do you want to know? If you had just 2 or 3 questions, main important ones you could pose to him, what would they be?
Oh, That's a tough one because the list of questions runs into about 5 pages.
I bet it does.
Crucial questions about the camera equipment and the film itself will be first on my list. I'm sure people who are concerned more about the creature than about the film would want to know things like what color was the skin, what color was the blood, things you can't tell from black and white film.
Of course. Oh, very good point. It was obviously a darker colored blood, but that's all you could discern on a black and white film.
The so-called eyewitnesses to the Roswell autopsies, and I'm talking here about the traditional Roswell story,
right,
claimed that the creatures that they saw had clear, colorless fluid in their bodies and no blood per se.
You know what I'm hearing, though, Bob, and maybe you know enough about the cameraman to know this. I've heard that he's made a statement that this was a crash on the plains of St. Augustine near Socorro somewhere, not Roswell. Have you heard that?
Well, I can tell you with some authority that this film and this crash that the cameraman is talking about has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the Roswell incident.
That's what I thought.
The traditional Roswell incident. This happened a month earlier, and it happened about 10 miles southwest of Socorro, not on the plains of St. Augustine,
okay,
but on the other side of the mountains from those plains.
10 miles south of Socorro.
About 10 miles southwest of Socorro, in a small dry lake bed. And the dry lake bed has been visited recently, about a month ago, by a colleague of mine who verified that, in fact, there is a small dry lake bed there, even though it shows on no maps, not even on USGS maps, and that there's about a 50-foot diameter area where the crash was supposed to be, which has obviously been excavated at some time in the past and filled in with soil from somewhere else.
Oh. Gee, you're telling us a lot of new stuff tonight. And again, for the later audience, there were a couple of other things that you suggested earlier that you knew that are not out publicly yet. You've seen 20 minutes, for example, of the film that nobody else has seen, including pieces of debris. Is that a better word? Debris,
yes,
wreckage,
debris,
whatever?
wreckage, whatever. When the thing came down, first of all, the thing came down possibly not by accident, possibly because we shot it down.
Stop there. The very large wound on the leg, which was the only very serious wound that I've discerned, and they talked about in Fox, they said that might have been some sort of a missile or a projectile or something that would produce that kind of wound. So that would be consistent then with perhaps having shot it down?
Well, the wound appears to be from the creature standing too close to an explosion of some sort. The wound goes all the way through the leg. It's a penetrating wound. There's an entry wound about 3 inches long and about 2.5 inches tall on the outer side of the leg. Then there's this enormous chunk of flesh torn out from the inner side of the leg, which suggests an exit wound. Possibly a shrapnel piece from an explosion caused this wound.
So we may have shot the damn thing down.
Well, when the cameraman was first sent to the site, he was told he was going to photograph a Russian spy plane that had been shot down. And there's a fair amount of reason to believe that that's what they thought it was until they got to the crash site. They thought they had downed a Russian spy plane flying over our nuclear facilities.
Mm-hmm.
And they got there, and lo and behold, it wasn't a Russian spy plane at all. It was something else quite different.
Well, I've always thought, with regard to Major Marcel, Army Air Corps, experienced career guy, to not be able to tell the difference between a flying saucer, or disc as he called it, and a weather balloon would be absolutely impossible.
That's ridiculous from the start. He would have known a weather balloon.
Sure.
The debris that we have the film of this particular crash did not come from the craft itself. The craft itself was completely intact. But there was a smaller dish on the bottom of the craft, possibly a communications dish, several feet in diameter, that was torn off in the crash. And all the debris that's shown on the film is pieces of this disc or dish that was torn off at the bottom of the craft during the crash.
And nobody's seen this. Is Fox negotiating to get this, or do you think Fox at this point has blown the story up so big that somebody else will end up getting it.
Well, Fox has this footage of the debris, and they chose not to use it because it doesn't tie into the rest of their story. They're trying to make this part of the Roswell incident.
I see.
They're trying to make it all one single event. And the debris doesn't look right to do that. It just doesn't fit. We also have film of the boxes the creatures were holding when they were found.
Really?
Oh, yes.
My God.
It's part of the same sequence.
Why isn't this, well, I guess it's public now, but why has this not been made public?
It has been made public overseas. Some of the overseas documentaries actually used this footage.
It's far too important for people not to know that all of this exists. And then you've told me there is even another canister of film, which is yet to be processed, which purports to show Truman. Is that correct?
That's right. Well, that's what it says on the label of the box.
Truman.
Mm-hmm.
In the extended footage, the little extra bonus they gave us last night, Don from Los Angeles wants to know, what about, they called it a crystal that they pulled out of the torso of this creature. And do you know anything about that? Have you looked carefully at that?
Yes, I have looked carefully at that because it's a very peculiar thing. I've single-framed that sequence probably dozens of times, studying it, because I have been present during autopsies.
Oh, you have?
And I have dissected pieces of cadavers and other creatures myself, and I have no, and this is not a pun, I have no earthly idea what that thing is. I've never seen anything like it inside of a human body or any animal I've ever seen dissected. I'm told that particular part is much clearer in the first autopsy, the autopsy we have not seen.
Mm-hmm.
There's more film of it also.
And again, the first autopsy for this audience is clear, isn't it? In other words, you don't have...
There's no out-of-focus sections because the cameraman wasn't wearing protective gear, and he was able to refocus for the close-ups of the first autopsy. The first autopsy, the doctors or pathologists or whatever they are not wearing the protective suits either.
The blood, you say, obviously it's not color film, but with some care, you can look at a grayscale, can you not, and determine something by the relative color of the blood? I'm not a photo expert. You are.
Well, there's a team of French researchers right at the moment who are attempting to use a very sophisticated computer program to colorize the film. The way this computer program works is you take things in the scene that you know the colors of, and you plug that information into the computer, and it extrapolates the colors of the other things from that.
Oh, that's fascinating.
It's not 100% accurate, but it works fairly well.
All right, Bob Schell, hold on. We'll be right back to you. Relax for a moment. Bob Schell, a photo analyst from Washington, D.C. He's done work for the FBI. He'll be back.
You're listening to Art Bell, Somewhere in Time on Premier Radio Networks. Tonight, an encore presentation of Coast to Coast AM from September 4th, 1995. You're listening to Art Bell Somewhere in Time on Premier Radio Networks. Tonight, an encore presentation of Coast to Coast AM from September 4th, 1995.
In the middle of what we're usually in the middle of, whatever is going on. A repeat of the Fox television special. But the fact is, you don't know the half of it. Bob Shell knows at least half of it, maybe more. We're trying to dig and find out. There have been a lot of revelations this morning. A lot to digest, and we'll get back to them in just a moment. Back now to Bob Shell in Washington, D.C. Bob, I know the Associated Press has interviewed you. Wait a minute, let me get him back on the air again here properly. There we go. Bob, the AP apparently interviewed you. What do you think they're going to do with that? Anything?
I have no idea. It may turn up on some kind of a program. It may not. I've done quite a number of interviews since this whole thing blew open, and most of the better ones are still in the can somewhere.
Well, this one's not in the can, except our can, and it's live on the air. Now, here's a question from Paul in San Jose. Did you see even so much as 1 second of what appeared to be any footage of a live creature?
That is an unanswered question at this point because we don't know if the creature in the tent footage is live or not. It may be. Because the lighting is iffy, it's hard to tell exactly what the technicians are doing. And some people who have looked at the footage have said that what they're doing is they're applying a bandage to a wound in the creature's side.
Well, you don't put bandages on dead people.
Right. So if that interpretation is correct, then the creature is alive, but probably comatose or unconscious for some other reason. It's not moving. Whether it's breathing or not would require careful frame-by-frame analysis of the film.
Which I presume will be done.
Oh, yes, of course, it will be done, yes.
What is your relationship now with Mr. Santilli? You said your relationship with Fox is a little iffy at best. What about Mr. Santilli regarding any further analysis of the rest of what he's got?
I have had complete and full cooperation from Ray Santilli and the other people at his company, Merlin.
Uh-huh.
I've had no problems with them whatsoever. They've been very forthcoming with any information I asked for. Not able to always supply it as quickly as I would like because they've been so busy themselves because of dealing with people from all over the world calling every 2 seconds asking for stuff. But they have gone out of their way to try to be as cooperative as possible.
All right, here are a couple of good questions. One you've already answered, but we need to answer it again. Why was there no still photographer present at the autopsy?
There was a still photographer present who was shooting while this motion picture cameraman was between rolls. Because he was wearing this protective suit, it took him much longer to change the film in the camera than it normally would have.
Right.
And during that gap, the still cameraman was moving in and taking close-up, detailed documentary pictures, some of which we assume, we don't know this for a fact, but we assume some of these would have been in color.
All right. Here's another one. Is, to your knowledge, the photographer afraid of the government? Is that one of the reasons he's not coming forward?
I think his greatest fear is of the IRS.
Yeah.
Because he insisted that the payment for the film be made to him in cash.
I see.
And he said that he was passing most of the money to his daughter. I think he doesn't want himself or his daughter to be hassled by the IRS.
All right, good answer. Art, for those who complain about the quality of the film, let us not forget the cameraman said that the reason he held on to the film in the first place was because he knew that he had overexposed it and was going to need to be processed in a particular way. Does that sound right to you, Bob?
Well, he kept back these 22 rolls of film because they had problems of one sort or another and required hand processing. They were not overexposed. I don't know where that came from.
Some of the scenes, though, do seem, in video terms, I'm not too much into photography, but I certainly am into video, and they seem whited out to me.
Well, the thing is that some of these rolls of film, the photographer intentionally exposed the film at a higher than normal rating and processed it specially to push the film speed.
I've got you.
And because he was hand processing rather than the machine processing, this is done in sort of an oval-shaped large tank that winds the film from one spool to another by hand. The density variation within the rolls is quite a bit. You know, it'll go from very light to very dark within the same roll of film because of this fairly primitive way in which it was processed.
Interesting. He goes on, and I think you agree with this, and the reason the government is not saying anything about it is because they can't. The entire UFO conspiracy has now reached such a boiling point that no lid can contain the contents of the pot. It's boiling over, and the less they say, the better off they'll be when they finally have to admit what's going on. Interesting. Would you agree with that?
It makes sense, although I think that there is probably factional fighting within the government between factions that want everything to be released and put out on the table in front of us, and people who still want to keep it secret.
Here's somebody asking, what is the difference between a dissection and an autopsy? I'm not sure I know myself.
The dictionary definition of an autopsy is a dissection performed to determine the cause of death. And we're not dissecting these guys to figure out why they died. That's pretty obvious what they died from. The dissection is to get the internal organs out and into preservative situation fairly rapidly so that more detailed study can be done later. And according to the cameraman, these creatures, once they're dead, decompose much more rapidly than humans would. So that's one of the reasons that the dissections are done fairly more quickly than a traditional autopsy would be done.
They seem to be pulling out a lot of what appeared to be non-connective tissue. Mush, gush, I don't know what you'd call it. It was pretty icky. Any comments on that?
Well, what they're pulling out in most cases is not something that you can relate directly to any organ that would be inside of a human body. For example, in the lower abdominal cavity, there are no long ropes of intestine. There's no large and small intestine. There's a large single organ which looks sort of like a large spongy mass that's removed.
Right, correct.
And below that, there's two smaller things which may or may not be kidneys. They're taken out too quickly to really tell exactly if that's what they are. There's no sign that I can see from the angles I've seen looking into the cavity of any reproductive organs at all. Whether there are or not lungs is hard to determine in the chest cavity. There is what looks like a heart, and then there's a very large organ under that heart which doesn't correspond to anything that we recognize.
All right, then this. If the doctors in the first autopsy wore no protective suits, as in the second, were their faces ever visible, sufficiently visible to be able to try to ID them?
There's a good possibility that can be done. You know, people like the FBI have these computer programs that can do a make on a partial face. And if we know who we think they are and can find an old picture of them of sufficient quality, we may be able to do this. We have the name of one of the doctors.
Oh, you do?
Right. In the first autopsy, there is a notepad or something that's held up to the camera that has written on it, autopsy performed by Dr. Detlev Bronk.
Say the name again, please.
Detlev Bronk, B-R-O-N-K.
Is he alive?
No, he's dead, but he did exist.
He did exist. We have confirmed that.
Yeah, and he was a military pathologist who would have been at a high enough level of security clearance to be involved in something like this.
My God, Bob, you've got so many details that Fox has not aired, so many corroborating important pieces of evidence that Fox has not aired. Why aren't they doing this?
Well, in some cases because they don't even know about it themselves, because they haven't really done a really in-depth research effort on the project.
All right, try this question. Could a hoaxer of today manufacture a film that would simulate the chemical makeup of the 47 film and fool somebody?
If you owned a film factory, you might, and I put that might in very large letters, you might be able to do that. But I place the odds of that very low. And we will have confirming corroborative testing by Kodak fairly soon that will do a chemical analysis of the film and compare it to their records of what they know that the film of that date should have had in it.
All right.
These are proprietary records that no one else would have access to.
I see. All right. Going back to the phones, west of the Rockies, you're on the air with Bob Shell. Hi.
Yes. Hi. How you doing?
All right.
I think it's that you can protect the identity of this photographer by setting up some kind of board of control that would look into this, an independent board, but would still protect his identity. And I think this is important. But I had a couple of questions. Number one, you mentioned a B-26 cover story. Did you mean a B-29? That was the only atomic bomber at the time.
I'm not an expert on aircraft. The person who told me the story said a B-26, but he may have misspoken.
Yeah, that was a very small, medium bomber.
Yeah, he may have misspoken.
You mentioned the chemical test on the film. What type of tests, spectroscopic tests or otherwise, that identified this as being consistent with the Super XX 1947?
That's a good question.
It's a destruct spectroscopic analysis. A small piece of the film is heated up and destroyed, and then the byproducts are analyzed spectroscopically. Exactly. And Kodak does know what film of different vintages should look like when that's done to it.
Ah, that's interesting. And also, could this film have been kept in an inert or a cold atmosphere and then exposed many years later?
Right, that was asked already.
A cold atmosphere, yes, but you can't protect it from cosmic rays. It would still be fog.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. This plot is really, really, really thickening, and it seems to me, Bob, that at some point it's going to reach an absolute critical mass. Whether or not the networks have access to the film, which they don't, Fox has the rights. It seems like it's going to reach some sort of critical mass. Maybe I'm going to help that process. Maybe you are too.
I hope so. It has already done so outside of the U.S. For some reason, we've had very little coverage of this here in the U.S., whereas it's been covered quite extensively in England, in major newspapers, in Germany, in France.
I'm going to tell you one reason why. I know why, because I do programs and have for years on these kinds of subjects, Bob. We are Judeo-Christian. The whole idea, the whole concept of aliens is challenging to many people's religious faith in this country. And that's one answer. I don't know it's the totality of the answer, but it's at least one answer.
And I don't really understand that, because I've seen nothing in the Bible, as I read it, that says that God created intelligent human creatures only once. Only once on this planet, but it says nothing about other planets.
That's exactly right, and I react the same way. Nevertheless, some people are challenged to the point of real anger. I know this, Bob,
yes,
because I've had the calls.
I've talked to some of them.
Indeed. East of the Rockies, you're on the air with Bob Shell. Hi.
Hi, Art. This is Kirby in Houston.
Yes, sir.
It appears to me as though this body that is in the film on Fox it could possibly be one of these creatures that we hear about that's artificially matured, like a human embryo. Does that seem reasonable to Bob?
Well, that's really outside of my range of expertise, but it doesn't seem unreasonable. I've speculated that what we're seeing is a biological robot rather than a biological entity per se, something that's engineered because it has a simplified internal structure, seems to have no digestive organs.
And the crystal.
And the crystal, right. So you have to wonder, is this thing something that evolved somewhere, or is this thing something that was built?
Well, the Greys we know do have biologically engineered beings that they use in their tasks. I've experienced some mental telepathy from one of the Greys, and they indicated something along these lines.
All right. Well, thank you. I don't know about that, but I think you may be onto something here, Bob. It was, or it appeared to be, somewhat simplistic and could have been sort of a half biological, half I don't know if the word mechanical, half technological device.
That's certainly a possibility. The one thing that bothers a lot of people, and especially bothers pathologists who have looked at the film, is the brain of this creature, because it does not look like the brain of a highly advanced, highly intelligent creature. It's smooth. It doesn't have the furrows that we associate with the increased surface area of the brain to increase intelligence.
It was pretty large, though. It was a pretty large mass, and
it's large, but not overly large by human standards.
I recall the pathologist saying that it was. He thought it was distinctly non-human.
Oh, it's definitely non-human. It's not as large as you would think it would be based on the size of the head. But if you watch the whole autopsy, you'll notice that when they saw through the skull, they have a heck of a time cutting through that skull. The skull is obviously a lot thicker and tougher than a human skull.
God, there's so many questions, so many questions. Wildcard line, you're on the air with Bob Shell. Hi.
Hey, good evening, gentlemen.
Yes, hello.
This is a professor, and I'm not angered. You know, you just made an earlier reference to some people that may be angry.
Well, if you're not, then you're not one of those.
I know. I have a deep Christian faith, but you know, me and you've gone back and forth on this thing since the very first night I called you, Art Bell.
Yes, sir. Do you have a question for our guest?
Well, I've just got an insight that I've held on to for about a week, and I haven't heard it. And the guest probably has, you know, since he's going to talk to the cameraman, he'll be able to ask this question more clearly.
All right.
And I'm sure it's a concern that some people have come up with. They just haven't voiced it yet. I mean, I know deep down in our subconscious we thought this. These beings are awfully intelligent. Do you agree, Art?
No, I have no way of knowing what their level of intelligence would be at all. Would you, Bob?
No. They came in a highly sophisticated craft, but we don't know if they built the craft or not.
I see. So maybe they're not that intelligent.
Maybe.
Anyway, if they had any reasonable, how do we say, reconnaissance of the Earth, then they could have, you know, we just had World War II, and you know, that was a very, very brutal war. Certainly if they had any reconnaissance of us, they would have known we were brutal individuals. Having known that, then it looks like there would have been some sort of contingency for a crash scenario on their part. You know, what to do in this situation should we crash? Should we be shot down? It seems to me that merely they're laying up against their ship crying, clutching something, that would seem to me to be more of a primitive. You know, it seems very primitive to me.
All right, well...
I'm shocked by the...
All right, look, caller. Bob, here are two things, and maybe you'd want to comment on them. One, that was a damn sensitive area at that time. It's where we were doing our nuclear testing.
Right.
So, in all probability, anything overflying the area would have been running the risk of being shot down. Two, if they were doing reconnaissance, the thing they would be most interested in would be our development of nuclear technology. Wouldn't that seem logical?
It does seem logical. That was the most sensitive installation in the entire United States at the time. So anything flying into that airspace would have been challenged on the radio for identification several times, and if no identification was forthcoming, if it kept coming into the sensitive area, it would have been shot down. That would have been our normal reaction.
And again, the wound was consistent with some kind of very close-in blast, the
Right.
leg wound that we saw.
And it's quite possible that if we're dealing with creatures who are totally alien to us, they may not have even conceived of the idea that we would be that hostile and been totally unprepared for it.
Yeah, that's the sad part.
There's no way of knowing.
Just sort of a social question. You can ponder it if you want. We're at about the end of this hour. If a craft were to land today, similar creatures, similar clutching the boxes and all the rest of it, do you think we would treat them with greater deference today than we did then?
Good question.
I have this terrible feeling the answer to it is probably not.
I sort of feel that way, too.
And, again...
Especially if it was the military who got there first.
That's right. And again, would we hesitate to shoot down a craft if we could? I don't think so. I live out here near Area 51. You know what that is,
Oh, yes.
Actually, I'm right next to it. And if something were to overfly it and be challenged, I can assure you it would be shot out of the air if we could.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, a lot of years have passed, but I'm not sure that much has changed. Bob, stay right where you are. We'll be right back with you. Bob Shell, a photo analyst who's done consulting work for the FBI and a lot of other government organizations, and has closely examined the new footage. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Art Bell, Somewhere in Time. Tonight featuring a replay of Coast to Coast AM from September 4th, 1995. You're listening to Art Bell, Somewhere in Time. Tonight featuring a replay of Coast to Coast AM from September 4th, 1995.
Good morning. If you're just joining us, I'm sorry. You've missed two very, very important hours. There's more to go. My guest is Bob Schell. He's in Washington, D.C. right now. He's done consulting work for the FBI, many other government agencies, was once in the CIA, has examined the film, the purported crash film, we think from a crash near Socorro, New Mexico, not Roswell. And there's just been all kinds of breaking news from Bob about this. One, that he's examined actual imagery film, and that he has determined that this film was indeed exposed in or near 1947. That's a big piece of news. Not 27 or 67, but 47. And a lot more about the first alien autopsy, one that is clear, not blurry, one that had doctors in face masks, not full spacesuits. All kinds of information. This has been packed full of it, and there's about to be more, and we'll get back to Bob Schell in Washington, D.C. in just a moment. Back now to Bob Schell in Washington, D.C. Bob, first of all, thank you for hanging in there. This is such important stuff. I know it's after 4 o'clock. 4 o'clock in the morning back there, I guess.
Oh, I didn't need any sleep anyway.
Bob, in the Fox presentation, both the first and now the second, anytime they took a full-body picture of the purported alien, they put in this little digital scratch-out where the genitalia would have been. You've obviously studied the film that does not have that.
Oh, yes.
Why, first of all, is it necessary that Fox did that? If they had shown it, would it been, what would we have seen? Would it have been female genitalia or what?
I have no earthly idea why Fox felt compelled to do that. None of the other television broadcasters anywhere else in the world scrambled the genitals. And
what have you, if you've analyzed any portion that showed that, have you been able to discern anything there, or is it just a dark?
No, there's nothing there that I think would have offended anyone. I can't imagine. What's there is what looks like a prepubescent human female's genitals, basically just a slit.
That's it, huh?
Yeah.
All right, then this. Dear Art, it has been suggested that if there are genitalia, they are female. It's been suggested that one of the masses taken from her abdomen may have been a amniotic sac. The body looked pregnant to me. I'm confused that no one else has suggested pregnancy.
The creature appears female only superficially. I don't believe that it has any sex at all. As far as the idea of pregnancy, none of the pathologists who have looked at the footage have thought that they saw any signs of anything resembling pregnancy. The puffed up abdomen is apparently just post-mortem bloating.
Okay. You saw or you've talked to people who have seen the first autopsy, the one nobody else has seen.
That's right.
Were they bloated in a similar way? Because you
no.
said the answer is no?
No.
Oh, my.
That one has a flat abdomen.
And you were saying that there was actually, or appeared to be, a bandage being put on one of them, indicating, obviously, you don't put, as I said, you don't put a bandage on a cadaver.
Well, that's the interpretation some people have made of the film. Mm-hmm. It's not my personal interpretation. I really don't know what they're doing. They're doing something to the side of the creature.
All right, the phone lines are burning up, so let's try it again. East of the Rockies, you're on the air with Bob Schell.
Can I cut my radio down?
Yeah, cut it down. Turn it off, actually, please. And then tell us from where you are calling.
Hello?
Where are you calling from?
WAI San Antonio.
San Antonio, all right.
There's something that fascinated me about what you're talking about. What I was wondering is the possibility if that life support, supposedly the scientists would have known at that time, that's probably what it was that they were clinging to. Could it be possibly secretly stored somewhere today? Behind locked keys?
Okay, that is a very good question. In fact, it coincides with the facts I've got here, Bob. Hangar 18 Do you or your guest know? Oh, I've heard about Hangar 18. I was given to understand the ship, or a ship, is at Hangar 18, or was, and is intact, Dawn in Wilmington, North Carolina.
Well, not according to the cameraman. According to the cameraman, the entire craft was taken to Wright-Patterson and studied and stored there, and as far as he knows, is still there. He has not commented about Hangar 18 and possibly has no personal knowledge of this part of the thing, this whole mythology that's been built up later on.
All right, I always thought it was mythology, Bob, but I've got a tape of Mike Murphy at KCMO in Kansas City, who interviewed Barry Goldwater. And in Barry Goldwater's voice, and I played it several times in the last week, Barry Goldwater says he asked Kurt LeMay about Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, General LeMay. General LeMay replied to him in 4-letter words that nobody can repeat and said, "Don't you dare ever ask me about this again, ever." Mm-hmm. To me, that lends quite a bit of credit. I always thought that was some sort of urban legend, but I've got it in Goldwater's words.
Yeah, well, when I was speaking about urban mythology, it doesn't mean it's necessarily not true, or that some parts of it are not true. It's just become ensconced as a myth, mm-hmm. and repeated endlessly by people who tend to embellish it each time they repeat it.
Might I ask you, in your field, Bob, I'm going to ask you for an assessment of your own reputation. How do your colleagues, are you regarded as a fairly mainstream photographic analyst?
As far as I know, they may change their opinion after my involvement in this project. But prior to now, they thought it'd be that way.
Were you scared of this?
Scared of being involved in it?
Scared, yeah, from a career point of view.
Yeah, I was, and I still have some reservations, but I'm too far into it now to pull out. And it's something that's personally very interesting to me. I'm excited by the possibilities, and especially excited by the possibilities if it does turn out to be the real thing. It
is a frightening thing to, from a career point of view, for anybody to pursue, Bob. I'm pursuing it because I can't not do it. And I've done this for years, and this, to me, if it is true, and I'm leaning toward thinking it is the story of everybody's lifetime. I mean, that we're not alone. It's such a big story that you just can't not do it. On the first-time caller line, you're on the air with Bob Schell. Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm calling from Seaside, Oregon.
All right.
And I had two thoughts, and I don't know if it's no more bizarre than the whole idea of what we've seen on the films. Has it been eliminated, any of the Nazi German experiments with humans and Mengele's work? I know that sounds bizarre, but what do you think?
Well, I'm not clear on the question.
Well, in investigating that this is a humanoid-type creature, we don't know if it's alien, we don't know a lot of things, but a lot of experiments have been done on humans and diseases and so forth and radiation or whatever. I just wondered if there's been any thought on could it have been created in some way here on Earth?
All right. Well, my answer to that would be no, because while you might certainly damage a body with radiation, you're not going to cause it to grow 6 fingers and 6 toes, to the best of my knowledge. Would you agree with that, Bob?
Well, it's a little bit outside of the realm of something I can comment on as an expert, but it doesn't seem likely to me. And there have been these suggestions from the very beginning that this is a human suffering from some rare genetic disorders. But the particular combination of disorders you'd have to create something this bizarre is just mind-boggling. And then to have 3 of them with exactly the same set of genetic disorders is just out of the question, I would think.
The numbers would be big. Right. In your work with the FBI or any other government agency, have you had occasion to previously analyze film of a dissection or of medical things?
Not in connection with any of the government agencies. I have done this sort of thing for some police departments and that sort of thing.
I see.
And I'm pretty familiar with what the internal organs of people are. I did all of the photography for a college-level manual on anatomy and physiology, which is a dissection manual. and in the process of doing photography, he had to spend quite a lot of time in some very unpleasant places to take the pictures. And so I pretty much know what comes out of a body when you cut it open and start pulling things out.
Okay, you obviously have contacts with government agencies. You probably have friends who are in the FBI. And if you don't want to answer this, don't. But I assume that you've had some private conversations with them about this.
Quite a few private conversations. And
without naming names, can you give us any idea of the content of those conversations, their reaction, what they said?
Well, there's a tremendous amount of interest in this because a lot of the people in various government agencies and government contracting agencies know that something is there. They've heard enough through the pipeline to know that there's something really going on.